Okay, we're live here at Grand Prix-Washington, D.C. We're talking to Pro Tour Austin champion Brian Kibler. Brian, you're playing a deck that was designed in part by Patrick Chapin today, is that right?
That's correct. Pat, this deck is definitely Pat's baby. You know, I made some suggestions here and there, but Pat's the one who built the deck.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, Pat calls it Next Level Bant. It's basically a Bant Vengevine deck. It's pretty similar to in sort of the way it plays out in some matches to some of the Planeswalker decks, because you're playing a control deck where you're trying to hold the ground, wall of omens and such, use removal to hold up your opponent's creatures, and then take control of the game with Planeswalkers. But against other sort of control decks, you can just crush people with Vengevines. The deck has a lot of things that support Vengevine. You have Range of Eos, you have a core Skyfisher, you have a lot of sort of cantrip creatures, and the deck can play a lot of different games. You know, it can be defensive when it needs to be defensive. It can be aggressive when it needs to be aggressive. So there's a lot of play to it. It's a really interesting deck to play.
Now, you mentioned the Vengevine card. This is one of the decks that's probably abused Vengevine more than any other decks in the format. Would you describe it as a Vengevine deck, or is that just for the control plan?
It's interesting. It's a Vengevine Planeswalker deck, really. Your role, Vengevine's such a powerful card against so many decks. You know, against control decks, it's an aggressive creature that can attack their Planeswalkers. It's really difficult for them to deal with. If they don't have a path to exile, it's very hard for them to remove from play. And against like Jund, for instance, you can just sort of hold them off with your Vengevines. You use Gideon to force them to keep attacking into your Vengevines, keep trading your creatures for theirs, and then just getting yours back.
Now you've got one core Skyfisher. Tell us how that works with the Vengevine.
Well, core Skyfisher with Vengevine, if you have Vengevines in your graveyard and you play core Skyfisher, you can use its ability to return itself to your hand, then play it again and get all your Vengevines back. So if you just keep replaying core Skyfisher, your Vengevines will never die.
And you only have one. Is it a problem drawing it?
Well, the deck actually doesn't really need the core Skyfisher, and I would say if I were to cut a card, I'd probably start with the core Skyfisher. It's a cute interaction, but between Range of Eos and how many creatures you have that sort of cantrip, and how easily you can hold more creatures in hand to bring your Vengevines back, that interaction really isn't all that important.
Now you mentioned cantrip creatures. You've got Wall of Omens, which is pretty typical for standard
decks. Wall of Omens is the standard for that. But we also have Seagate Oracle, who has gotten a lot of strange looks all tournament.
How's that one been for you?
Seagate Oracle has been fantastic. But one of the things about this deck that I think makes it so powerful is that you are able to play pretty much a more streamlined deck than anyone you're playing against. Between your Seagate Oracles, your Wall of Omens, you have tons of cantrip effects. You have ways to sort of accelerate through your deck and find your important cards. So, when you're playing against a Jund deck, you can find your Vengevines to block with. Playing against another control deck, you can find your Planeswalkers to take control of the game, or your Vengevines to beat them down. So.
Now, there's no Baneslayer Angels in the deck. Was that intentional?
Well, one of the things about this deck, and you'll actually notice that not only Baneslayer, but also Knight of the Reliquary is nowhere to be found, which is another ubiquitous creature in this sort of build. And one of the sort of theories behind this deck is that you don't want to give your opponent good things to do with their removal. You're sort of basically forcing them to use removal on creatures that are giving you advantages. Your opponent wraths your board, they kill your creature, and you still just 6 cards in hand. Whereas if your deck was things like Knight of the Reliquary and Baneslayer Angel, they terminate your Baneslayer and that's just gone, and you have no more action. Those cards are so common with Jund is a popular deck. There's blue-white decks all have wraths and such. So it's built around the idea that you just continue to provide yourself with more gas and eventually grind them out.
Let's talk a little bit about your sideboard.
Okay.
Now I noticed you've got Core Firewalkers for red decks.
Yep.
But you've also got a card that's seen a lot of play actually in a lot of decks this weekend, Linvala, Keeper of Silence.
Linvala is an important card and a very powerful card against Cunning Sparkmage, against other Bant decks that have Knight of the Reliquary and a bunch of mana creatures. You can shut down your opponent's Birds of Paradise, you can shut down their Noble Hierarchs, and you can keep their Knight of the Reliquary from fetching anything. As well as, very importantly, against the Naya decks, you can keep them from being able to kill things with Cunning Sparkmage, which otherwise your deck is pretty vulnerable to.
Now, I noticed you have another Rise of the Eldrazi card, Deprived. What was the decision to run that instead of maybe 4 negates or some other combination?
Against, for instance, Mythic decks, they don't have that many powerful threats against you. The cards that really matter are Baneslayer, Knight of the Reliquary, and Sovereigns. And the games go pretty long unless they're just blowing you out quickly, which hopefully you can prevent with your early removal. But Deprive's a card that you can use to stop their threats, which aren't always necessarily spells. Against control decks, you're always stopping a Wrath or a Planeswalker, whereas against Mythic, you might want to stop a Sovereigns. Against Jund, you might want to stop a Siege Gang Commander. So Deprive gives you a little extra flexibility in those matchups as well.
Cool. Now, what would you describe as your best matchups?
I think the best matchups are any sort of blue-white control decks. You just have so many ways to punish them for being slow and being they have so many effects that rely on they wrath you and you sweep your board and now they're ahead. But if they wrath this deck, I just fill the board back up. I just throw a bunch more creatures back out there. My Vengevines come back and bash them. So definitely the control decks. I've beaten all the control decks I've played against so far.
Then would you say the aggro decks are bad matchups, or
I think, red is a pretty weak matchup. That's why we have Core Firewalker specifically. It's possible we actually should just have more Wall of Denials, because Wall of Denial gives you more game against Jund decks. A lot of times the matchup against Junds can be fairly strange, because sometimes you need to bash them with Vengevines, but a lot of times the ground just gets sort of mucked up with Sprouting Dranax. So being able to sort of stay alive with your wall is pretty good. But I think that like I was saying before, the Spark Mage is a pretty serious issue if they have the Collar, and if they have it early, it's a pretty big deal because they can kill your mana creatures as well.
So if you want to beat Control and some of the bigger threat decks, and have a weak matchup against Red and a 50-50 matchup against Jund, you'd say this is the deck for you?
Well, I think that this deck, if anyone wants to play this deck, they really need to try it out a lot, because it's a very difficult deck to play. I've been making mistakes all tournament, and I think there's just so many different lines of play. You have a Jace, a Gideon. There's just so many different options. Do you attack with your Vengevine? Do you hold your Vengevines back? What creatures do you have with Ranger? Sometimes it's important to be able to remember to fetch a Bird of Paradise with your Ranger, so you can actually attack over your opponent's Wall of Omens with Exalted and Killer Jace. So there's all sorts of little things that you need to learn to be able to play this deck effectively. So it's definitely a very solid deck against all the control decks. The games, in particular, when people don't really know what's going on, I think you're a bit advantaged against Mythic, probably a little bit against Jund, and you're a bit of a dog to the aggro decks and the decks of Spark Mage.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot, Brian. Play well for the rest of the day, and there you have it.
All right, thanks a lot.